You married Dad for his money. Take your suitcase and leave.
I'll leave, but 14 months from now, a judge will make you read his will aloud.
You married Dad for his money, my stepson said, dropping my suitcase at my feet. 14 months later, I signed away every claim they said I wanted. Then the judge ordered their lawyer to read their father's will aloud, and his face turned white. Hello, my name is Evelyn Carter. I am 56 years old, and until 2 years ago, I believed patience could soften even the hardest heart. I was wrong. Sometimes patience does not change people. Sometimes it simply gives them enough time to reveal exactly who they are. I met my husband, Thomas Carter, at a hospital fundraiser in Charleston, South Carolina. He was 63, a widower, and the founder of a successful building supply company. I was 51 and managed a small community library. I had never been wealthy, but I had a home, modest savings, and a life I was proud of. Thomas did not impress me with his money. He impressed me because he remembered the name of every server at the fundraiser. When an elderly volunteer dropped a tray, Thomas knelt beside her and helped gather the broken glasses while other guests stepped around the mess. We talked for an hour that night. He told me his wife, Margaret, had died 7 years earlier. He had 2 adult children, Daniel, a corporate attorney, and Rebecca, who owned an interior design studio that Thomas had quietly financed. I told him I had been divorced for almost 20 years and had no children. I also told him I was not interested in being rescued. Thomas smiled. Good, he said. I'm tired of people who need rescuing. I'd rather meet someone who chooses me. We dated for nearly 2 years before we married. Daniel and Rebecca were polite in public, but their smiles never reached their eyes. Rebecca once asked what brand of dress I planned to wear to the wedding. When I named a small local shop, she looked relieved, as if I had passed a test by not spending too much of her future inheritance. Daniel was more direct. 3 weeks before the ceremony, he invited me to his office and placed a prenuptial agreement on the table. This protects Dad, he said. Does your father know you prepared it? I asked. His jaw tightened. It's what any responsible person would do. I read every page. The agreement said I would make no claim against Thomas's company, investment accounts, or family properties if we divorced. It also stated that each of us would keep the assets we brought into the marriage. I signed it. Daniel stared at my signature. He had expected an argument. Anything else? I asked. He looked almost disappointed. No. I should have understood then. Daniel was not looking for proof that I loved his father. He was looking for a reason to believe I did not. Thomas and I had 6 happy years together. They were not perfect years, but they were real. We cooked on Sundays. We argued over the thermostat. We took long drives with no destination. He helped raise money for the library's children's program, and I helped him slow down after 40 years of working 12-hour days. What his children never saw was that Thomas had become tired of being treated like a bank. Daniel called when he needed investors. Rebecca called when her studio missed payroll. Thomas always helped, but afterward he would sit in the sunroom, staring at the garden. They ask how my accounts are doing before they ask how I'm doing. He once told me. I encouraged him to speak honestly with them. He always said there would be time. Then, one rainy evening in October, Thomas collapsed beside the kitchen island. The doctors found an aggressive heart condition. He survived the first attack, but his strength never fully returned. During the next 8 months, I drove him to appointments, organized his medication, and slept in a chair beside his hospital bed. The Daniel visited when paperwork needed signatures. Rebecca visited when she wanted photographs for social media. One afternoon, Thomas woke after Rebecca had left and saw the flowers she had arranged beside his bed. Beautiful, he whispered. They are, I said. She took them with her after the photograph last time. I thought the medicine had confused him. It had not. 3 weeks later, Thomas asked me to call a lawyer named Samuel Price. I recognized the name. Samuel had been Thomas's private estate attorney for more than 20 years. While Daniel handled company contracts and family business, Samuel came to our house alone. Thomas asked me to leave the room. I did. That detail would matter later. Thomas died on a quiet Tuesday morning with my hand in his. His last clear words were not about money or property. Do not let them make you doubt what we had, he said. At the funeral, Daniel shook hands like a politician. Rebecca cried whenever a camera pointed in her direction. I stood beside Thomas's grave feeling as though the world had lost its sound. The first surprise came 4 days later. I returned from buying groceries and found my suitcase on the front steps. Daniel and Rebecca were waiting inside the doorway. Rebecca folded her arms. You married Dad for money. He's gone now, so take your suitcase and leave. For a moment, I thought grief had made me misunderstand her. This is my home, I said quietly. Daniel stepped forward. It was our father's home. We know what women like you do after wealthy men die. Women like me. Do not make this ugly, he said. You signed a prenup. You have no right to the company or family property. I looked past them and saw that the family photographs had already been removed from the hallway. The silver-framed picture from my wedding day lay face down on a table. Something inside me broke, but it did not make a sound. I picked up my suitcase. Rebecca smiled as if she had won. I did not tell them the suitcase contained only the clothes I had packed for a planned weekend away. I did not tell them the house deed had been changed 3 years earlier. Most importantly, I did not tell them that Thomas had left me a sealed letter with a single instruction. If Daniel challenges my will, say nothing until Samuel tells you it is time. I moved into my small house across town, the one I had owned before meeting Thomas and never sold. Daniel apparently had forgotten it existed. Within 48 hours, he filed a petition claiming I had manipulated Thomas while he was ill. He demanded that the court invalidate Thomas's final will. The strange thing was that Daniel would not produce the will he claimed was invalid. Instead, his office sent me copies of an older will from 11 years earlier. Under that document, Daniel and Rebecca inherited nearly everything in equal shares. A charitable foundation received a small gift, and Thomas's surviving spouse was allowed to live in the marital home for 1 year. Daniel expected me to panic and settle. His first offer was $100,000 if I waived all claims and left Charleston. I declined. His second offer was $250,000. I declined again. Then the rumors began. Anonymous posts called me a gold digger. A local gossip website published a photograph of me leaving the courthouse and claimed I was trying to steal a grieving family's legacy. Rebecca told mutual friends that I had kept Thomas isolated during his illness. That lie hurt more than I expected. For 6 months I said nothing publicly. I kept working at the library. I met Samuel every few weeks, and at night I studied boxes of documents Thomas had stored in my attic. The boxes revealed why he had changed his estate plan. Daniel had borrowed $3 million from the company for a real estate project and hidden the debt as legal consulting expenses. Rebecca had used company funds to pay rent on her studio, lease 2 luxury cars, and renovate a beach house she claimed belonged to a client. Thomas had discovered everything 1 year before his death. He had not reported his children. He had given them a choice: repay what they had taken and keep their positions, or lose control of the family company. They had promised to repay him. They had not repaid $1. There was another mystery. The bank statements showed a payment of $75,000 from Daniel's law office to a private medical consultant shortly before Thomas changed his will. A Daniel's court petition relied on that same consultant's statement claiming Thomas had lacked mental capacity. Samuel and I found the consultant's original appointment notes through the legal discovery process. They said the opposite. Thomas had been alert, informed, and capable of making decisions. Someone had removed that page from the report filed in court. When Samuel showed it to me, my hands went cold. Daniel knows this could destroy his career, I said. Samuel nodded. That is why he needs you to settle before the will is opened. Why hasn't it been opened? Samuel leaned back. Because Thomas created a condition. He knew Daniel might use delay pressure and public humiliation. He wanted the court to see what Daniel did before anyone learned what was at stake. That answer frightened me. And what is at stake? Samuel slid the sealed letter back toward me. I cannot tell you yet, so I waited. 7 months became 10. 10 became 14. During that time, Daniel and Rebecca took temporary control of the company. Within weeks, they fired 2 executives who had worked for Thomas for decades. They announced plans to sell the company headquarters and move operations to Atlanta. Rebecca posted photographs from Thomas's boat, calling it family tradition, although she had once complained that the boat smelled like diesel fuel. Then Daniel made his worst mistake. He sent me a 40-page settlement agreement. It offered me $500,000. In exchange, I had to surrender every possible right to Thomas's estate, admit that I had influenced him, and promise never to discuss the case. At the bottom was a line saying the agreement would become effective only after approval in open court. Samuel read it twice and smiled for the first time in months. Thomas anticipated this exact document. He said, "The morning of the hearing, I wore a simple navy dress and the pearl earrings Thomas had given me on our 5th anniversary. Reporters gathered outside the courthouse. Rebecca arrived in white, looking as if she were attending an awards ceremony. Daniel walked past me without making eye contact. Inside, his lawyer placed the settlement papers in front of me. Mrs. Carter," Judge Helena Brooks said, "do you understand that by signing this agreement, You surrender all financial claims against the estate. I understand, I said. Daniel finally looked at me. There was victory in his eyes. And no one has forced or threatened you? The judge asked. No, Your Honor. I signed every page. Rebecca released a little breath and reached for Daniel's hand. Their lawyer began gathering his files. Then Samuel stood. Your Honor, the condition described in Article 12 of Thomas Carter's final will has now been satisfied. We request that the original will be admitted to probate. Daniel froze. His lawyer stopped moving. Judge Brooks looked over her glasses. Mr. Price, do you have the original document? Samuel placed a sealed envelope on the clerk's desk. Daniel shot to his feet. There is no later will. Samuel turned toward him. You witnessed it. The courtroom went silent. Color drained from Daniel's face. The judge opened the envelope, examined the signatures, and then looked directly at Daniel. Mr. Carter, your signature appears here as both a witness and an attorney acknowledging receipt of this document. Daniel swallowed. I believed it had been revoked. Based on what evidence? He had no answer. Judge Brooks read several pages in silence. Then she turned to Daniel's lawyer. Counsel, your firm submitted the settlement agreement. Please read Article 12 of the will aloud. The lawyer rose slowly. His hands trembled as he accepted the document. In the event that either of my children accuses my wife Evelyn of marrying me for financial gain, contests this will on that basis, or attempts to remove her unlawfully from our marital residence. He paused. Judge Brooks's voice sharpened. Continue. Wazoo, their inheritance shall be reduced to the documented amount they earned independently of loans, gifts, or unauthorized transfers from Carter Building Supply. Rebecca whispered. What does that mean? The lawyer kept reading. Any assets forfeited under this article shall pass to the Carter Employee Trust, established to provide retirement benefits, medical assistance, and education grants to employees and their families. A sound moved through the courtroom. Not quite a gasp, not quite a cheer. Daniel gripped the table. Dad would never do that. Samuel spoke calmly. There is more. The judge nodded for the lawyer to continue. My wife shall receive the marital residence free of debt, together with my personal effects and the sum of $1, provided she voluntarily waives all further claims against my estate after any contest is filed. Every face turned toward me. $1. That was what Thomas had left me from the estate. Not millions. Not the company. Not the boat. Not the investment accounts. The papers I had just signed did not take a fortune away from me. They proved, in open court, that I had never been fighting for one. Samuel asked the lawyer to read the final paragraph. His voice was barely audible now. The residence described herein was transferred to Evelyn Carter by recorded deed 3 years before my death and is not an estate asset. This provision confirms my intent only. To my children, if this article is being read in court, then you valued my possessions more than my judgment, and you treated the woman who cared for me as an intruder. The consequence is yours, not hers. Rebecca began to cry, but this time no cameras were pointed at her. Daniel's anger exploded. She planned this with him? He shouted. She made him punish us. Judge Brooks struck the bench with her gavel. Samuel handed the clerk Thomas's medical evaluation, the missing page, and the financial records showing the unauthorized transfers. Your Honor, he said. I also request referral to the State Bar and the District Attorney for possible evidence tampering, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Daniel sat down so suddenly that his chair rolled backward. That was the moment his own lawyer's face turned pale. He understood that he had not been defending a family dispute. He might have been used to present altered evidence to a judge. The hearing did not end with dramatic handcuffs. Real justice rarely moves that quickly. But the judge froze Daniel and Rebecca's control of the company and appointed an independent administrator. She admitted Thomas's final will, rejected the challenge, and referred the records for investigation. Over the following year, the truth came out piece by piece. Daniel surrendered his law license while facing fraud charges. Rebecca sold her beach house and studio to repay part of what she had taken. Their final inheritance, after debts and unauthorized transfers were calculated, was almost nothing. The Carter Employee Trust received the company shares. The longtime employees voted to keep the headquarters in Charleston. The 2 executives Daniel had fired were invited back. And me. I returned to the house, but it no longer felt like a mansion. It felt like the place where Thomas and I had burned pancakes, watched storms roll in, and argued about that stubborn thermostat. In his sealed letter, Thomas apologized for asking me to remain silent. He wrote, I know 14 months will feel cruel. But if I give you wealth directly, they will say it proves their accusation. If you surrender it freely, they will be forced to confront the truth, You were the only person in this family who never asked me for anything. I cried when I read those words. Not because I had won, but because Thomas had known the battle would come and had tried to protect both my dignity and the people whose work built his company. I sold the large house 6 months later. It held too many echoes for one person. I used part of the money to expand the library's children's wing and named the reading garden after Thomas. The rest supports a small foundation for caregivers who lose income while looking after sick family members. Rebecca wrote to me once. Her letter said she was sorry, although much of it still sounded like an explanation of why she had behaved badly. I did not answer immediately. Forgiveness, I learned, is not the same as reopening a door. Daniel never apologized. Perhaps one day he will understand that his father did not disinherit him because of me. Thomas gave him a final choice, and Daniel signed his own name beneath it. People sometimes ask why I stayed silent for 14 months while strangers called me a gold digger. The truth is, silence was not weakness. It was the space in which every lie grew confident enough to step into the light. My stepchildren told me to take my suitcase and leave because they believed money was the only reason anyone stayed. In the end, I walked away from the fortune without losing anything that mattered, and they held on so tightly that they lost it all. That was Thomas's final lesson to his children, and it became mine too. When greed writes the accusation, truth does not need to shout. It only needs the right moment, and a judge willing to read the final page.